Come on, computer, we can do this. There we go. Hey everyone, I'm sorry, my computer was taking it forever to load today, so we can get started with this review in about 4 minutes. And as always, if you have any questions, throw them into the chat. I'm happy to answer any questions during all of these live reviews. I'm here to help you. I don't know if I'm going to post them or not. But you have access to everything. It's all on all these YouTube videos. How are we feeling? The test is 1 week from today. Are we ready? Have we been studying independently outside of school or outside of these live reviews? No, it is never too late to start studying as long as you do it now. I mean, I would say maybe the night before is not a great time to start studying. When it comes to, okay, if your teacher hasn't given you the breakdown of this yet, I can talk about this now while we're waiting for people to come in. So the multiple choice version of your test is 55 questions. You have 55 minutes. That is worth 40% of your overall score. The last 60% comes from those written responses, the majority of which is, I guess, your DBQ if you're looking at like the longer essays. Short answer questions and LEQs, I think LEQ is 15%, short answers like 20%, and the DBQ is the rest. So what I always tell students to focus on is focus on your writing. Like that is the one thing that you can practice really often. You don't need to use, like you don't need to find multiple choice questions online somewhere. You can just look up all of the old AP prompts and then practice writing a thesis statement to answer each of these prompts. Practice writing a contextualization statement because the majority of your test grade comes from those written responses, short answer questions, DBQs and LEQs. And the other thing that I'll tell you when it comes to writing is make sure that you are being as specific as possible. What I always tell my students is that like, assume the reader knows nothing. Assume that you have to explain everything in great detail for any of it to make sense. Don't use pronouns. Don't say they did these things. Who did what things? You want to be as specific as possible so that you show the readers what you know. We'll get started in just a couple minutes, so make sure that you have a writing utensil and paper. And then, yeah, if you have any questions, keep asking. I went live last Monday and Wednesday. I'll be live today and on Wednesday. And then for my Ultimate Review Packet subscribers, I'm going to do a live writing review, and that's going to be on Thursday. But if you didn't see any of my lives last week, they're all on my YouTube, so you can go back and watch all of those. And I'm doing my lives by period, not by unit. So I guess like today is going to be period 3, which is 1815 and 1914, and that covers units 6 and 7. Anything you really want me to hit on today before we get started regarding unit 6 and 7? So industrialization and its effects and 19th century perspectives and political developments? Do we know? Parv Wednesday is going to be units 8 and 9, aka time period 4. Jared, low, because I think that was an FRQ within the last couple of years. I think there was something about like the liberal revolutions within the last couple of years, but I can double check that. Or you can double check that if you just Google it. Okay, let's get started at 6:05. This is going to be shorter than last time. Sorry that the last one went like an hour and a half. I'm going to try to actually get this done in the next 55 minutes, hopefully 45 minutes, and then I can answer any questions that we have at the very end. So as always, chuck your phone across the room. Don't even have it next to you. Make sure that you are focused, paying attention, locked in, students, locked in, and that you have out a writing utensil and a sheet of paper. I don't want any click clacking away. I don't want any typing away. Make sure that you are actually focused on what I'm saying and taking notes appropriately. And let's get into it. So this is going to be type. There we go. Which is 1815 to 1914. So this is going to cover 2 units. Unit 6, which is industrialization and effects, and then Unit 7, 19th century perspectives and political developments. And we're just going to get right into it. I also think that the majority of your teachers probably taught industrialization the same way. I'm assuming that we played the urban game, that industrial revolution game where like you're drawing everything on a sheet of paper. That is the most helpful way to teach the Industrial Revolution and think about its effects. So if you did that in your class, make sure that you are thinking about that in your big brains right now, because that's going to be super helpful as we go back through this overview. So my guiding questions for this unit are: what are major political, economic, and social effects of industrialization? So if you are taking notes right now, what you could choose to do is make like a little 3 columns: political, economic, social, and then you're going to just take notes as I talk about all of those different effects as a result of industrialization. And kind of long-term and short-term impacts of industrialization. Spoiler alert, things in the short term were really bad. Things in the long term got a lot better. So let's contextualize just the content of the Industrial Revolution itself. Why did it start in Britain? Well, we have all of these things that I've already talked about in my previous lives. The Enclosure Acts, which, just a reminder, is when people start enclosing up the commons. So the commons used to be pasture lands that were shared by everyone within a village. Then you have essentially people start privatizing land. So they literally will just put fences around this and say, this is mine now. And those enclosure acts mean that farmers don't have a place to farm anymore. So they're going to start moving to the cities. So those enclosure acts lead to urbanization. The agricultural revolution also leads to urbanization because it's new, faster ways to produce food that require less farmers. So more people can, again, move to the cities because we don't need as many farmers. Increasing population, thanks to, again, all of the connection with Europe and the rest of the world, and gaining essentially all of those foods from the Americas, plus gaining more medical advancements due to the scientific revolution. The commercial revolution, people are used to buying more things than they were before. Geography speaking, England has a really ready deposit of coal and iron really close to their surface of their lands. So like those are the 2 things that were necessary to fuel that first industrial revolution. And they have navigable waterways. So if you can see on this map right here, I have coal and iron ore. And then you can also see all of the rivers that it's just going to make production really, really easy. Parliament also supported England's industrialization because Parliament had vested interest in helping England industrialize, because they knew that they could make money off of it. And the Enlightenment, I mean, this just kind of continued ideas of we have the ability to kind of make whatever we want out of our life as part of it. But also we have these Enlightenment philosophers like Adam Smith and the physiocrats saying, no, actually the wealth of nations comes from free trade and not from these mercantilist policies. So all of those things together led to the Industrial Revolution starting in Britain. And the first wave really happens in the mid 1700s. So we're looking at the Industrial Revolution, 2 waves. First wave, things go from being made by hand to being made by machine. It is powered by coal and steam. And it starts in the textile industry. Originally, prior to the American Revolution, right, British were getting a ton of cotton from the Americas. American Revolution happens. Britain is still getting a ton of cotton from India. So it is of no, what am I trying to say? It should make total sense as to why why the Industrial Revolution starts in the textile industry, because they have all these raw materials that they're then processing back at home in the factories. And what they start to do, especially in England, in this first wave, is that the factory owners essentially are acting like venture capitalists. So all of the profit that they're making off of that factory, they're then funneling back into the factory to make machines better, faster, more efficient, because again, they know that that's going to make them more money. So first wave is really like mid 1700s in England. And then second wave starts like mid-ish 1800s, and we see it spread throughout Europe. So second wave is you now have things that are still made by machine, but better machine. This time powered by electricity, also initiated by the Bessemer process. So the Bessemer process is a way to smelt steel, and that is going to lead to stronger machines and just like an explosion of building and construction everywhere. So if we look at this map, I love this map because it shows you how that second wave of industrial revolution spreads throughout Europe. This is something that the College Board for sure wants you to know, is that it really kicks off in Northwestern Europe, and it takes a lot longer to spread to Southern and Eastern Europe. And the reasons for that are geography. So just like literally not as good geographical luck as what was going on in Western Europe, persistence of serfdom, and a lack of governmental support. So those three factors led the Industrial Revolution to more slowly spread to Eastern Europe and to Southern Europe. Oh, let's talk about political effects, students. Whew. So this is the isms. These are these new ideologies, and I'm probably going to camp out here a lot because I feel like this is a concept that students struggle with. So if you're taking notes right now, I need you to literally draw this line on your sheet of paper. This line represents the political spectrum. If you were to put like a little line right in the middle, that would be moderate. That makes sense. People are right in the middle. If you are moving to the right, one tiny notch, we get conservatives. So conservatives right here, the way that you can think about that is conservatives desire the status quo. They don't want things to change. When we think about conservatism in Europe in the 1800s, that's going to be traditional monarchs keeping power. That's going to be traditional like hierarchy in the Catholic Church working with the monarchs. So conservatives want things to stay the same. They don't want change. If we move a step further to the right, we see reactionaries. Reactionaries say, hey, we actually don't like how things are right now. We want things to go back the way that they were 100 years ago. So if we're thinking about this desire for change as like your political spectrum line, conservatives are like, keep things the way that they are now. Reactionaries are like, things are terrible now. We need to go way back to what it was like way before. On the left side of the line, or on the left side of the moderate, like tick mark right in the middle, you have liberals. Liberals want change. Liberals want change through legal processes. Liberals want to use the government to pass laws that will enact change. Radicals also want change. They want extreme change, and they don't really care if the government's involved or not. A way that you can think about this is the radical phase of the French Revolution, right? They're just going to exclude the law and bring about the exact change that they want, not through any like legal pathways. So liberals and radicals both want change. Conservatives and reactionaries want to keep things the same. Liberals want to do change legally. Radicals are like, let's overthrow the system. I will answer any questions that you have about that after we get through Unit 6. So if you have any questions, throw them in the chat, and I will get back to that once we finish this unit. Another political effect of the Industrial Revolution is a rise in nationalism. So this isn't just because of the Industrial Revolution. Nationalism has been on the rise in Europe forever, but especially after Napoleon tried to conquer everything. So in 1815, right, Napoleon, leaders meet at the Congress of Vienna and then try to restore the balance of power in Europe. And the way that they do this is they place those traditional monarchies on the throne, right? If we go back to the French Revolution was successful in that it turned into a constitutional monarchy, descended into chaos in the Reign of Terror, had this like 5-man directory. Then Napoleon ruled as first consul and then emperor, and then tried to conquer Europe, and then got exiled. And France was like, maybe we should just go back to the monarchy, right? We have like all of these traditionally held sources of power trying to regain power after the Napoleonic Wars. But because of those Napoleonic Wars, nationalism is on the rise. People are like, I don't want to be ruled by France. Like, who is Napoleon? He doesn't have anything to do with my national identity or who I identify as, you know, a German or an Italian. So nationalism has been on the rise since then, continues to be on the rise, especially as countries are gaining wealth due to the Industrial Revolution. If we look at Russia specifically, Russia. Poor Russia has just always tried to keep up with what's going on in Western Europe. I mean, we see that starting with Peter I, and we still see that into the late 1800s and early 1900s with Alexander II. Russia loses the Russo-Japanese War. So Russia loses a war against Japan in 1905. And this is humiliating for Russia. And it exposes the fact that they hadn't modernized and they hadn't industrialized. So Alexander II really tries to push for reforms and modernization. He was the Russian Tsar that banned serfdom. His finance minister, Sergei Witt, really tried to bring Russia into like the modern kind of global world. And conflicts about Russia start here. Like, again, the people are not happy with the state of Russia. And the first Russian Revolution, which you do need to know about because it is mentioned by name in the CED, happened in 1905. So this is going to happen after the Russo-Japanese War. People are upset with everything that's happening, and that's been happening. Russia is like economically behind its Western counterparts. The lower class, even though serfdom was abolished under Alexander II, doesn't have a lot of rights. They don't have political power. So we have a decisively peaceful revolution led by a priest. They march onto the palace and they're like, hey, give us some more rights, please. And then what does the Tsar do? He literally fires into the crowd, killing a lot of people. We call this Bloody Sunday. So it is after this Russian Revolution in 1905 that really starts to foment this political desire to overthrow the Tsarist monarchy in Russia that we see happen in 1917. And again, that is all a response of Russia's lack of modernization and people upset about that. So we have this push for nationalism. We now have this idea that people should have rights. Liberalism, liberty means like freedom. So you should just be able to do what you want to do and rule over yourselves and have all of these rights that apply to everyone, not just like the upper echelon of society. This leads to revolts, which one of you had mentioned in the comments at the start of this video. 1848, we see revolutions all across the center of Europe. We call this, I call this the springtime of the peoples, because people are like, actually, yeah, what if we kind of inspired by that French Revolution, try to fight for more rights and fight for more power? And it leads to revolts that are ultimately unsuccessful. Like overwhelmingly, these revolts don't work out. They do start to weaken that Congress system, that concert of Europe, or that Congress system, which is again all of those politically conservative monarchs trying to maintain power. These revolutions like are a threat to that, so it starts to weaken it a little bit. That will ultimately fall and collapse when the Crimean War. We're going to get there later. Don't worry about it. A lot of these other people who are desiring change start to form political parties. Look back at England for a second. So there is a group of people called the Chartists. I would definitely know them by name if I were you. The Chartists started out as a labor union, essentially, then turned into a political party. And the Chartists advocated for radical concepts like the fact that every male should be able to vote. And not just like landowning males, but just if you are a male, you should be able to vote, which was considered quite liberal at the time, right? Because they did try to do that legally, and they did pass that charter. I hope that you've seen that political cartoon of like these guys trying to like stuff a charter through like the doors of Parliament. Some people, and this is where liberalism starts to split when we're looking at the political effects of the Industrial Revolution. Some people start to believe that suffrage should extend to all, including women. And then some people are like, nah, it's just men. So we do see like a split in the liberals. Some become more radical and say everyone should be able to vote, and some say no, just men should be able to vote. We also see a rise of anarchism. Anarchism means that we don't need the government to do anything because it's not going to protect us. We don't like the government, and also we probably hate religion too. So a lot of these anarchists advocate to live in like these underground communes, which I think is interesting. Economic effects. So again, we're kind of still talking about these isms. Socialism. Oh, when you think about early capitalism, like Industrial Revolution, late 1700s, early 1800s capitalism, you have a huge wealth gap emerge. We have the factory owners who are making all the money. We have the factory workers who are making none of the money. Socialists see this economic division, and socialism says, hey, what if we like take a step to even out that wealth gap a little bit? So this was always intended to be a stepping stone of like people sharing things more evenly to get to ultimate communism, which is where everything is shared equally. Socialism, in this time, was looking at like, hey, let's just redistribute wealth. It doesn't make sense that the upper class has everything and aren't doing the work. The lower class has nothing and they're doing all of the work. When you think about socialist economic policies nowadays, and hopefully this can just help it stick in your brain, is that a lot of European countries that have adopted socialist economic policies heavily tax people because they think that heavily taxing, right, the upper class is going to bring about more equality. And then the government with those taxes would fund things like healthcare or education for everyone to benefit from. Again, if you have any clarification questions, please ask me in the comments. So continued social effects of industrialization is conscious social classes start to arise. So people start to identify themselves as the working class, the proletariat, or the middle class, which at this point is going to be the bourgeoisie. So we have like the elite upper echelon of people. They've been elite forever. They just come from like rich landed aristocracy families. They owned the land. Now they own the factories. They're just way up here. But we have this emerging middle class of people, this bourgeoisie, that maybe are merchants, or maybe they control banks, or maybe they're shopkeepers, or they're engineers, or they're making machines that fuel the Industrial Revolution. And they're gaining a lot of new money. They're gaining all of this new wealth. And they want to distinguish to the rest of the world that they are no longer in that working class. So the bourgeoisie start to do things like spend money in certain ways, dress certain ways, act certain ways. That proves that they have the money to do that, right? The working class, they're still kind of going to be like this bottom rung of society. And they want to make sure, the bourgeoisie wants to make sure that they are elevated from that. They're not really ever going to be the upper class, but like they want to just make sure that they're not in that lower class anymore. And the most clearest way that we see this play out is in the debate about women. This cult of domesticity for specifically bourgeois families means that a woman's place is not in the factory. It is not in the fields. It is literally in the home caring for children. And the reason that bourgeois families adopt this policy is because it shows to the rest of the world that the man of the household has enough money for his wife not to work. So because of that, that's like a very distinguishing factor between the proletariat, where probably everyone is working equally, versus this new bourgeois family of like, nope, women can stay at home, women can raise the kids because like the dad is bringing home the bacon kind of idea. Other social effects of industrialization is urbanization, right? So many people are moving to cities, and that's leading to a lot of problems, whether that's crime, prostitution, just more visible poverty. Also, infrastructure is strained. So you now have, I mean, if you think back to that game, I really hope that you played that game, right? In my class, we were like drawing tenements everywhere. Like there was no space for anything. And you can think about that leading to a lot of problems. There's like pollution in ways that there hadn't been before. People are like really haphazardly trying to throw together homes where they can live close to the factories. And it was leading to just a lot of chaos within the cities. So short-term impacts of the Industrial Revolution, I would argue, were very negative, right? You have this huge distinction between the upper class and the lower class. Lower class is working like 16-hour days, getting paid like cents an hour. Life was really terrible for them. But over time, those lower class start to form unions together, which eventually turn into those mass-based political parties. And those labor unions start to regulate working hours and wages. And once, eventually it was like a 12-hour act was passed, and then a 10-hour act. And then like we finally figured out maybe 8 hours a day seems appropriate. Once that was all settled, and once wages started to increase to a better amount, people now had a disposable income. You now have money and time in ways that you didn't have it before. So you can now spend your money on things that aren't necessities, and you have the time to do so. So this leisure time leads to things like sports becoming more common. We have opera, we have theater, we have like going to go do fun things in the arts. We're hanging out in parks, we're riding bicycles. So we start to slowly see kind of people developing like this leisure culture in Europe as a result of the labor unions and their fight for like more equality. Also, the fact that work is now done by machines leads to the end of slavery. Students, it is no coincidence that Britain was the first country to industrialize, and Britain was the first country to ban slavery. And you might be thinking in your brain, oh, yeah, well, Emily, it's because they were so enlightened and like everyone should have equal rights, and that's why people like led abolition movements. A very small portion of people probably did it that way. But like, yeah, it was because they didn't need the labor anymore because we now have machines doing stuff. And we start to see reforms to modernize infrastructure. So in your CED, it talks about how liberalism shifts from people should just be able to figure it out on their own to liberals now advocating for the government to intervene to solve infrastructure problems, because the wealthy people weren't doing anything to better the general society. So the liberals started advocating for the government to step in and try to solve some of those problems. A really great example of this is in England, along the River Thames, like a whole new sewer system was set up in like, I don't know, it was like a decade, not even a decade maybe. because there were so many people living in London, and all of their waste went into the Thames, which is like the major river right in the center of London. And it smelled so bad, and it was like so swelteringly hot that the people couldn't deal with it anymore. So the government finally intervenes and says, oh yeah, like let's develop this new sewer system, which is awesome. Okay, so to recap this unit, I went through that super fast. And I'm going to pause after this. I'm going to answer any of your questions. The Industrial Revolution created an incredible amount of problems early on, but those issues led to reformers stepping in, eventually leading to an overall higher quality of life for most. Women's roles changed as upper class women have more restrictions placed on them, and feminists start to fight for more legal and economic rights. Slavery was abolished by the late 1800s across Europe. Politically, labor unions turned into political parties in order to fight for economic, social, and sometimes legal rights for workers. The disenfranchised rebelled against the ruling class with liberal revolts, leading to the reinvigoration of conservatism, the adherence to traditional values by many European leaders. That doesn't make it all the way through the 1800s, though, because that will collapse at the end of the 19th century. And that's it. I went through that so fast. So I'm going to take a break. I'm going to look at the comments. I'm going to answer any questions you have. Okay. Does that scale mean that the age of Metternich considered more reactionary than conservative? Ooh, no, I would say, Jared, that's actually a really good question. We associate that in this class as being conservative because they're just trying to adhere to like those traditional conservative values. But you could argue that because things were trying to change so rapidly, right? Because because the French Revolution was leading to so much change that the conservatives were really trying to rein it in. Be like, whoa, let's go back to like the mid 1700s, like prior to the French Revolution, where the Catholic Church is still strong, where monarchs are still in power. Tima, because why wasn't Russia super industrialized at that point if they had Trans-Siberian Railroad? Just because you have a long railroad that connects the East and the West doesn't mean that like your modern cities are industrialized in the same extent. So like, yes, you have this like wonderful thing that connects trade across Siberia, but that doesn't mean that like the daily people were seeing the effects of like their economy growing because of industrialization. I'm going to talk about the Crimean War in just a second, so have no fear. Yeah, actually, what I would like you to do, let me see if I can pull this up really quickly. Give me 1 second. If you are not following me on Instagram, follow me on Instagram because I've been posting every single day things that you need to know to be successful in this class. So like literally from 39 days to the AB test until next week, I'm posting big overviews of every single topic. And I think that they are incredibly helpful. And then at the end of each of these, I also have TLDRs. So like these are like major summaries of things that you need to know. And let me just find the one that is about the isms, and then you can screenshot it or do something helpful with that because I find it to be one of the most helpful TLDRs that I've made. So just give me one moment while I try to figure out where this is. If my computer's gonna load. While I'm trying to pull that up, let's see what else we got. Causes and effects of the revolutions of 1848 is that people inspired by nationalism, again, Napoleonic Wars, and liberalism, so people should have more rights, not just like the wealthy people who have had rights forever, that's going to inspire people to essentially like fight for more political and economic freedoms from their respective rulers. So that is happening kind of all across Europe at the same time. So one of you asked, like, what's the difference between the 1848 revolutions and the 1830 revolution? So that July revolution in France, oh my gosh, is this it? That July revolution in France was the 1831. And that is like, honestly, a continuation of the French Revolution, right? At the very start of this video, I talked about how at the end of the Napoleonic Wars, France was like, let's just restore the Bourbon monarchy. So this is now people saying, nope, we fought against that for a reason. Like, let's get rid of that. Let's still give people more rights and not just let the monarch have all of the rights. Okay, I have this here. Share this tab instead. All right. Hey, hopefully you can see this. So I have this, which I think is super helpful. And I'll just go over all of these isms real fast one more time. Conservatives want to keep the monarchy and the social order and the church because they're like, well, we don't want to change anything. We have the power. We want to make sure that we have the power. We don't want to give the power out to other people. Let's keep it the same. Liberals are like, actually, people have freedom. Liberalism, liberty, freedom. We should protect rights. We should protect free markets. We should protect constitutionalism because we want to have people have a say. So we're going to make it like polite freedom because we want to do this legally. Radicalism is all about tearing down the old system, build a full new one. Like we don't like the liberals are too light, conservatives are like way not where we want to be. So like let's burn it all down. Let's start it over again. Full democracy, full equality. Everyone gets to vote. Everyone gets that universal suffrage. Anarchism, no gods, no masters. Abolish all forms of authority and let people organize themselves freely. This could be a fun thought experiment to have if you're looking at those Enlightenment philosophers and their view of the state of nature. How would these Enlightenment philosophers think that people would play out in like an anarchist society? So socialism is about sharing the wealth, protecting the workers, and let the government help create a more equal society, right? The government needs to step in and intervene to make sure that the upper class doesn't have all the wealth. So they need to do something to divide that out more. Marxism is something that I didn't talk about yet. Marx says that all of history is a class struggle. So he goes through essentially every single economic system that has happened in European history prior to like the mid 1800s. And he says, hey, so what I'm seeing is that it's always been a conflict between those who have and those who have not. So it's always been a conflict between the wealthy and the workers. And he goes back to feudalism to look at this too, right? It's like the landowners aren't doing anything. The serfs are doing everything. So he is saying that what needs to happen and what should happen every single time is the working class needs to rise up and overthrow the people who own the means of production in order to establish a more equal society. Working class is going to rise up. Capitalism is doomed. So socialism was just supposed to be like a stepping stone to get to communism, where everyone is that equal society. Also, I've mentioned feminism just a little bit here. Obviously, women deserve rights, respect, and representation. And again, all of these things that I have, you can find on my Instagram. So if you are not following me, it's too cool for school. Check it out on Instagram because this has hopefully everything that you need to be successful on the AP test. Oh my gosh, so many things. Wow, you're so chatty in the comments today. I really appreciate it. Is there a clear connection between industrialization and the concert of Europe? I mean, you could say that like long-term effects of industrialization would eventually lead to the breakdown of the concert of Europe. That happens really at the end of the 1800s. And I'm going to say that's motivated by the Crimean War, which again, I'm going to get to next. Yes, this is all for Unit 6, and everything that I've said so far is Unit 6. There was more, this was what you need. What else do you need? Chartist movement. So yeah, you have some labor unions, like people who are essentially liberals who are fighting for more rights. The Chartists specifically want to give men the right to vote, all men, not just wealthy landowning men. So if you are a male in England, you should have the right to vote. You should have a right to participate in your government. No major anarchist states, because there wouldn't really be any major anarchist states because they are anarchists and don't believe in government. You can also, I guess the one other thing that I could mention here is utopian socialism. So there are some socialists like Charles Fourier, like Robert Owen, who say actually the way that we can be better in society together is essentially live in communes. So like live in these like communal apartments where everything is shared. Like you might have your own room, but like we all have like, think about it like a dorm room at college, right? Like you might have your own room, but like we have this common eating space and we share the land and like we're just sharing everything. I think it was it Owen and Fourier, or maybe it was just Owen who actually made one of these happen in the United States. It was ultimately unsuccessful. Specific factor that contributed to the rise of the working class, that would just be like you have people who are now Not necessarily like owning the factories, but you have people who are instead like managing the things that are produced in the factories, right? So whether that is like a factory owner or sorry, a factory worker, oh my gosh, Emily, a factory manager, like an engineer or shopkeeper, right? Like merchants who are now selling the goods that are produced in the Industrial Revolution are going to help kind of enter them into that working class. I am not going to specify the differences between Marxist communism and Lenin's communism because I'm going to talk about that when we get to the Russian Revolution on Wednesday. Okay. No, okay. Here we go. I'm just going to move on. Okay. Let's share this tab instead. And let's move on to unit, which is 19th century perspectives and political developments. So, got any questions here? What were the effects of the rise of nationalism in Europe during the 19th century? And what were causes and effects of new imperialism? I think I have one more. Oh, that was it. So yeah, kind of major things that are happening in this unit is that we have nations joining together or splitting apart. And then we have scientific changes that make people think that the world is going insane. And then we have imperialism. So if we are thinking about the start of like what is contributing to the rise of nationalism and all of these changes, the Industrial Revolution and like the lingering effects of the Enlightenment, the lingering effects of the Napoleonic Wars. So essentially all the things that I just talked about before this. So let's talk about the Crimean War. TLDR, too long, didn't read. Russia is trying to expand into Eastern Europe. This is a threat to Austria. Austria and the Ottoman Empire are like, whoa, 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 stop taking our land. They're fighting over right here, Moldavia, Wallachia. So Austria is like, hey, Britain, France, what if you like help us out? We want to maintain this balance of power, right? We're all these conservative leaders. So what if you help me fend off Russia so that we are keeping the balance of power in Europe? The war plays out really here on the Crimean Peninsula, which is also still in the news a lot today, if you've been paying attention to what's going on between Russia and Ukraine. It ends by Russia losing. That's just the easiest way to think about it. Russia loses, Britain and France do great, Ottoman Empire starts to crumble because the Ottoman Empire, this exposes the fact that they have also not industrialized or modernized. So in Southeastern Europe, in the Balkan Peninsula, we have all of these national groups that are like, hey, maybe we don't want to be part of the Ottoman Empire anymore. Maybe we want to like separate and like fight for our own independence against this Ottoman Empire. Austria actually does not participate in the Crimean War, which then, because of that, they start to lose power and influence in the East, which allows Germany and Italy to unify. So the Crimean War leads to the unification of Italy and Germany. It also leads to the breakdown of that concert of Europe. So all of these conservative powers were trying to maintain the status quo. They were successful in that they stopped Russia's expansion in the East, but it just leads to so much quick upheaval, and it directly leads to the unification of Italy and Germany that it breaks down this concert of Europe, right? This Congress system of these traditional conservative leaders trying to maintain power. So let's talk about Germany first. Oh my gosh, give me a second, y'all. Okay, let's talk about Germany first. So two kind of longer term effects that led to the unification of Germany that I want to touch on are the Zollverein and Friedrich List's national system. So these were attempts, right? Germany is not unified. If you look at this map right here, it's a bunch of kind of Germanic states that have existed since the collapse of the Holy Roman Empire in 1648. So the Zollverein is a way to economically allow for like a more freedom of movement of goods throughout these Germanic states. So it's a reduction on tariffs in all of these Germanic states to try to, again, say like, we can buy from each other because like we're all common and like we speak the same language and we have the same heritage. And like, we're trying to like slowly start to integrate economically together. Friedrich List's national system is essentially saying, hey, the government's going to build some railroads and we can all use those railroads. Again, trying to promote that economic unification. And then Otto von Bismarck rolls up on the scene and is like, hey, again, Germans, cultural heritage. We all come from the same place. We speak the same language. We eat the same food. What if we just unite? He is the leader of Prussia. Prussia was the first to industrialize. Otto von Bismarck, strong military. So he successfully and strategically wages some wars that get him more land. And because he's successful in doing so, people are like, oh yeah, Germany, like this, we should be like one nation because we're going to be strong and powerful and we're in the center of Europe and like, let's be national again. Otto von Bismarck specifically does this through isolating France. Otto von Bismarck and Napoleon III, who was the leader of France at the time, do not get along. Otto von Bismarck essentially passes some fake news in the Ems telegram that requires or that forces like France to declare war on Germany, on Prussia. Then Prussia like destroys them. Prussia stealing land from Austria. Otto von Bismarck adopts this policy called Realpolitik, and the way that you can think about that is Machiavelli. The same idea, like the ends justify the means. It doesn't matter how you get there as long as you get there. It's pragmatic politics. So Bismarck is saying, you know what? I want a united Germany, and I'm going to like kind of do all these weird lying things that involve a lot of cheating and fighting against the people around me because I know at the end of the day, Germany is going to be united, and that's what matters the most. And, you know, this is in Prussia's wars with all the states around it. This is really showing our kind of first example of industrialized warfare, which we then, of course, see culminate in World War I. And Bismarck's handling of dealing with Austria, dealing with France isn't always super nice, which leads to increasing tensions between Germany and France. I wonder if anything is going to happen between Germany and France in, like, I don't know, the early 1900s or through the Treaty of Versailles. We're talking about rise of nationalism in France. You need to know that Napoleon III was a conservative leader who lost a bunch of wars against Otto von Bismarck. That's pretty much the extent to which I talk about him in my class. Also, he did attempt an empire in Mexico that was ultimately unsuccessful. Okay, let's move on. Let's talk about Italy, because that's the other big one that I spend time talking about. If we're looking at Italy, Italy was not united since the Roman Empire. They're broken up into all of these independent kingdoms ruled by various people. And because, again, of the Crimean War, Austria lost some of its holdings on northeastern Italy. Italy starts to fight for unification. Same idea as what Otto von Bismarck is doing in Germany. Hey, we have this common heritage. Hey, let's unite together. Hey, we're going to be a stronger power if we all come together and like form one country rather than being all these disparate states. And you can see that slowly it happens over time. The process by which it happens, I don't ever teach my students. So if you know that, that's great. I'm sure that you could use that as strong evidence in your essays if there are any questions about unification. But the two people that you do need to know is that Camillo Cavour is kind of the mind, right, behind what is happening. He is the one who's organizing his diplomatic ways, trying to unify a lot of these different states together. And then Garibaldi is using his military to like help Cavour unify all of these states together. So those are the two big people that you need to know for the unification of Italy. And then let's talk about Austria-Hungary. So Austria-Hungary, right? Again, a failure of their like absence in the Crimean War. We have a huge number of ethnic groups living in Austria-Hungary. You can just see this map right here. So the Habsburgs at this point had consolidated their rule in Austria, but the largest ethnic group in this empire in Austria is the Hungarians. So Austria is essentially faced with a question. They're like, we are either going to split apart and become two different countries, or we are going to create a dual monarchy where we recognize the authority of the largest ethnic group, the Hungarians. And in doing so, we will maintain our power and maintain our stability and maintain our influence in the East. So this was an attempt, unlike where we're looking at Germany and Italy, they're like really trying to unify together. Austria was essentially unified, but they were at risk of falling apart because they didn't want these people inspired by nationalism to form their own empires. So they say, hey, we want to keep the peace. We want to stabilize our empire. The way that we're going to do this is by creating a dual monarchy. So they do. Austria-Hungary then becomes a thing. Other example of nationalism is Zionism. So in the late 1800s, across Europe, I mean, you could also argue for like the majority of Western European history, Judaism was persecuted against. So there's an increasing anti-Semitism, persecution for Jewish people in Europe as a result of, again, those Napoleonic Wars and as a result of the rise of nationalism, because countries around Europe are saying, well, what does it mean to be French? What does it mean to be German? What beliefs do we have? What religion do we follow? And if we're looking specifically at France, this guy named Edouard Drumont says, to be French is to be Catholic. So in France, we see a great example of anti-Semitism play out. It's called the Dreyfus Affair, which essentially a guy was persecuted and accused of doing something that he didn't do and then was jailed for a really long time. And it was all because he was Jewish. So that is a great example of anti-Semitism, which then spears on this fight for Zionism, which is Jewish nationalism. This was created by a guy named Theodor Herzl. Theodor Herzl says the Jews aren't safe in Europe. So what we need to do is have like a national Jewish homeland. And we can see how anti-Semitism played out in Europe in the Holocaust. And we can also see how Theodor Herzl's dream of Zionism plays out with the UN's creation of Israel in 1948. So that's politically what's going on in this unit. Scientifically, new relativism and positivism and all these words that your teacher probably hated talking about. Here's the easiest way to think about it. Einstein comes up with this theory of relativity. Max Planck comes up with this idea of quantum mechanics. Prior to this, the universe was very knowable. Newton said the universe operates in like these three really understandable ways. All of the scientists in the scientific revolution agreed with that. And then Max Planck says, actually, I don't know that that's true. And Einstein is like, actually, everything's relative. So this leads to a loss of confidence in objectivity. The things are more subjective, things are more relative than they were before. You and I can see things and understand things and interpret things in different ways. That's this idea of relativism. So the universe was proved by science to not be knowable anymore. We actually don't entirely understand how the universe operates. And that's kind of fun if you're a scientist nowadays because you can always discover new things. But in the 1800s, that was terrifying for these Europeans who were like, okay, our world is already chaotic enough as it is. And now like we don't actually know the natural world around us. This translates directly to the rise of the age of anxiety. The universe is complex. Are people complex? Do we actually have any understanding of how things work in the world? What is the meaning of life? Is this age of anxiety that we definitely see culminate in existentialism during the Cold War. So another way to think about this is that scientists start to see the universe as complex, and philosophers try to bring that back to themselves. They're like, okay, if the universe is complex, are humans also complex? Are people also complex too? This leads to the rise of philosophers focusing on the irrational or the subconscious and the conscious. So Freud is a great example of this. Freud was like, yeah, there are things that we do consciously, but there's also like an internal subconscious within us that is motivating our actions, behavior that we might not fully know, right? It's this idea that we are unknowable and the universe is unknowable. So things went from being known to not being known and very subjective, and people can have their own interpretations of stuff, which is going to shift a lot of things in European society and definitely shift things in art, which we'll get to. While all of this is happening, new imperialism is also going on. So Charles Darwin comes up with this idea of natural selection. So the species that are the most suited to their society, their environment that they live in, are going to be the ones that survive. This guy named Herbert Spencer takes that a step further and tries to apply it to human society. Herbert Spencer, British, obviously, looks around and says, us Brits, we're the best in the world. Does that mean that we are the most adapted to our society? And does that mean that our culture is superior and that then we should share our culture with all of the people around the world? Which is going to lead to scientific racism, aka social Darwinism. And this is going to be a huge motivating factor for Europeans to want to imperialize lands in Africa and in Asia. New imperialism refers to the conquering of lands in the 1800s and early 1900s by Europeans in Africa and Asia. Old imperialism would be the colonization of the Americas. They're motivated by the same things, gold, glory, and God, except for it's slightly different this time. If we're looking at old imperialism, gold was like literal gold and silver bullion from the Americas. New imperialism, that gold is going to be resources that fuel the industrial revolution. Glory is going to be glory for your monarch, or if you're a conquistador, glory for yourself. And old imperialism, in new imperialism, that's going to be glory for your country, right? Like you want to bring glory and honor for your nationalism, right? For the country that you are conquering because you want to be better than all of these other European countries that are around you. And then God in old imperialism, that's going to be Jesuit missionaries, so Catholic missionaries setting up a lot of schools in the Americas. And then in new imperialism, it's really going to be Protestant missionaries. So still Christian, just different versions of Christianity. And a huge motivating factor is, again, the idea of social Darwinism, the white man's burden. It is our burden. It is our duty as white men to go bring civilization to the rest of the world who are incapable of doing it on their own. And they're now conquering with industrialized weapons. So we have things like machine guns. We have things also like communication oh my gosh, what's the word I'm looking for? New technologies like steamboats that are going to allow, especially Europeans, to navigate those African rivers a lot easier. We now have railroads. We have now have telegraphs. That communication is going to be a lot easier, and the conquering genuinely is going to be a little bit easier for the Europeans, especially because they have industrialized while the rest of the world had not yet industrialized. They also have now access to medicines, which is going to make, again, their travels throughout Africa and Asia easier because they can now protect themselves against communicable diseases. And there's something else that I wanted to say here, but I forgot what it is. Oh, difference in rule. Old imperialism, conquest of the Americas, these European countries are going to allow a lot of those colonies self-rule, right? Because they are sending over their people to live in these lands. And they're like, yeah, sure. Like, sure, you 13 colonists, have your cute little House of Burgesses, have your cute little, whatever you're trying to do, your Continental Congress. And we see how that played out for Europe. They lost all of their colonies in the Americas. So this time around in new imperialism, there's much more of a direct rule. So Europeans are not allowing the people that they conquer to rule themselves. They are sending their people to rule over their subjects in these new colonies. So it is much harsher this time around. And there are many myriad examples of that. So if you just want to be really sad, just look up King Leopold in Belgium. Effects of new imperialism. This is going to lead to tensions in Europe. So in 1884, Berlin Conference was organized. The Berlin Conference is when these European countries got together and sat around a map of Africa, and they were like, I'm going to circle this part. I'm going to circle this part. And we're all going to agree to this, right? I'm just going to randomly claim these borders and everything's fine. It was not fine. Even though the Europeans agreed to that at the Berlin Conference, there are examples of Europeans not following through with that promise that they were going to respect these borders. Great example of this is the Moroccan crises in the early 1900s, where Britain essentially tries to foment up revolution in Morocco against the French, because again, Britain and France don't like each other. So this is going to lead to just more tensions building up in Europe. Countries are concerned about other countries getting more power, more influence, again, because now they have these new colonies, which is going to explode ultimately in World War I. We do have a couple of people debate whether colonies are a good thing or if imperialism is a good thing. Great example is Lenin himself. He's like, hey, maybe we should just let people do what they want to do. Maybe we shouldn't be concerned with profit more than anything else. So maybe imperialism shouldn't exist. And over time, as these Western European countries specifically start to colonize lands in Africa and Asia, they are developing schools and giving a lot of these people Western education over time, right? And then these new colonies that are colonized by Europe are like, so you're teaching us about the Enlightenment. You're teaching us that people should have individual rights. Should we also have those things? So eventually that is going to lead to and culminate in the overthrow of these imperial powers after World War II. Cool, this is my last one. Cultural and artistic changes that are happening during this time period too. Romanticism, again. So Romanticism is a result of the Enlightenment and also the Industrial Revolution. So religion says that truth comes from God. Enlightenment says that truth comes from reason. The Romantic movement says that truth comes from emotion. So people are really trying to they see what's happening in the world. They're like, no, we don't like the cold hard truth of the Enlightenment. Let's feel our feelings. And then also we don't like the destruction of the environment that's happening with the Industrial Revolution. So let's go retreat in nature. Another artistic movement is realism. Realism is people drawing, people doing real things. Art is now used to draw attention to social problems. So a lot of those realists are painting things of hey, this is actually what life looks like right now. We don't just need to paint beautiful pictures. We can also just paint what it is. And that's going to kind of help expose these social problems that are going on in Europe. And sometimes, especially with Romanticism, it's going to idealize beauty and patriotism. So a great example of a piece of Romantic art is Eugène Delacroix's Liberty Leading the People. That's the one with the lady, the French lady, and there are dead people all around her, and she's holding the French flag. That is a great example of romanticism because it is liberty, it is an ideal, it is freedom that is leading the people. And that, again, is trying to motivate patriotism, what it means to be French, what all the French people should do. That is also painted as a result of the July Revolution in 1838, not the first French Revolution. And we see a rise in abstract expressionism. Easiest way to think about anything after realism, like any of the 1900s on art, is that let's just not care about beauty anymore. Let's just like express how we feel and how we see things in the world. So when you see impressionism or post-impressionism, so people are just drawing things outside, usually using fun like swirly dashes, we now don't care about making the most beautiful, classically beautiful piece of art. Again, if you think about Jacques-Louis David's Napoleon, if you think about Eugène Delacroix's Liberty Leading the People, like those are beautiful pieces of art. Like they just look quite stunning. We don't care about that anymore. We just actually want to express how we feel in maybe not traditionally beautiful ways. Especially if you think about Cubism playing into this age of anxiety, everything is abstract, everything is subjective. I interpret things differently than you do. Let's make really weird looking art. Thanks, Picasso. So to wrap it all up, nationalism is on the rise throughout the 1800s. National movements lead to the dismantling of Congress system, unification of Italy and Germany, and is about to lead to the dissolution of the Ottoman Empire. Nationalism also leads to the rise in Zionism, the creation of Austria-Hungary. Tensions are high in Europe by the end of the 1800s and into the early 1900s. Economically, industrialization fueled new imperialism as European powers sought to grow their empires through the acquisition and subjugation of new lands in Africa and Asia. Economies are increasingly interlinked and connected, and a truly global economy emerges by the end of the 1800s. So, I mean, you could argue that the global economy had been emerging for a long time, even through those overseas trade routes, but now everything is so intricately connected because the Industrial Revolution is leading to mass production, and therefore mass consumerism. And culturally, people begin to view the world as more abstract. This Newtonian idea of a known universe crumbles. Racism and cultural superiority, fueled by social Darwinism, impacts Europe's interactions in their new held lands. And here are all the terms that you need to know, listed by name in the CED. So you can go grab your phone now. You can take a picture of this. You can ask me any questions about any of these things that I didn't touch on. And I'm going to go to the comments and then answer. Wow, look at you answering each other questions. This makes me so happy. Oh, yay. Do you have to know the reforms of Alexander II of Russia? If you know that he was a modernizer and a reformer, great. He also did abolish serfdom. So I would say that he took kind of radical steps in Russia to try to modernize, especially compared to Catherine II. Unifying Italy, that's going to be like Camillo Cavour, Giuseppe Garibaldi, and then also Giuseppe Mazzini, but he's kind of less important compared to the other two. Yep. Age of anxiety. I like in my class, I like to talk about it as like an age of anxiety 1.0, 2.0, and 3.0. Your age of anxiety really starts now with these scientific changes. Like the universe is no longer known, and that stresses people out. So it starts in like the late 1800s into the early 1900s. I mean, I guess starts in like the early 1900s, and then absolutely picks up after World War I, because people are like, oh, wow, mass industrialized warfare and deaths in a scale that we've literally never seen before. How do we deal with any of that? I know that science is everyone's least favorite part of AP Euro. That's why I wanted to spend a little bit of time talking about it. New relativism, yes, includes Freud. Oh, a lot of you are answering your own questions. King Leopold II for new imperialism in Belgium. I just think that like he was the guy who spearheaded it. He was the guy who like commissioned essentially the Berlin Conference to happen. The Berlin Conference was led by Otto von Bismarck, but King Leopold II, Belgium controlling what is now the Democratic Republic of the Congo. Man, I wish that I had that with me. There's this like really, really great quote about King Leopold before King Leopold becomes king. He's like prince at the time, saying that Belgium has like no more land to conquer because of their geography in Europe, and they want to show the world that they're an imperial power. So how are they going to do that? They need to go colonize like these unconquered lands, and it is just like so chock full of all of the motivations for imperialism, and it's so chock full of social Darwinism and like this white man's burden idea. Oh, such a great quote. I mean, it's a sad quote, but it's great. Okay. Wander above the sea of fog. Oh, Caspar David Friedrich. That is a great example of romanticism because he is staring out into the distance. He is in nature. He is contemplating life. It is all about feelings. It is all about interpreting what you, I mean, if you actually, I love having this in my class. If you actually like look at what's going on in the background, you can't always tell, right? He's above a sea of fog, but what's below him? Is it an industrialized city? Is it, do people see it as like just nature itself? So like you are kind of like, again, pulling in these abstract ideas. Things are subjective. Everything's not knowable. Let's just like rely on our feelings and go hang out in nature. What's the best way to get examples for SAQs, DBQs, and LEQs? You can literally Google AP European History 2024 FRQs, and you will see all of the free response questions that were asked. So like all of the old prompts. You can also go through and read out examples of students that students actually wrote and what the score was for each of their essays or for the short answer questions, what would have given them points and what didn't give them points. So if you want to do some independent studying, I think they have them posted through like, I think it's 2021 is the most recent one that they have on their website. You can go through the last 4 years of AP Euro and actually see what questions were asked. Can I review Cubism again? Cubism, like Picasso, it's just this idea that we can express ourselves in a way that we want to, that doesn't have to be beautiful. So Picasso really spearheads that movement. And Picasso's Cubism really starts to shift how people are going to continue to do art in the 1900s. Because things don't have to be beautiful anymore. We can just express ourselves in the way that we want to. Cubism, everything's abstract, right? You look at this painting, you don't actually know what you're looking at until you spend time thinking about what's going on. I will not dive into the Balkans conflict because I'm going to do that on Wednesday, because that is going to lead up to World War I. Explain more social Darwinism and anti-Semitism. So social Darwinism is the idea that essentially white people are the best suited to their environment, and that's why white people have historically done the best in world history. This was a British guy saying this. And because of that, it is now white people's duty to like go bring civilization to everyone else. So hopefully in your class you are familiar with the white man's burden, whether if you read the poem or you've looked at the political cartoon. It's that this idea that motivates that it is the burden of the white man to bring civilization, to bring religion to these uncivilized folks in Africa and in Asia. And then anti-Semitism is just anti-Jewish people. So that's going to be really tied in, is concomitant with growing nationalism. Because again, what does it mean to be British? What does it mean to be French? What does it mean to be Belgium? And oftentimes, a lot of these people are still going to coalesce on a shared common faith. So France, to be French, is to be Catholic. I mean, we see that really from Louis XIV on. So they are going to strategically say, like, if you're Jewish, you don't fit into our national culture anymore. So we see this rise of anti-Semitism across Europe as a result. Would I consider realism to be similar to art in the Northern Renaissance? Yeah, that's a great comparison. You're just trying to like draw normal people doing normal things. Love that. West versus East Industrial Revolution. So that is just saying that like Industrial Revolution spreads in the West fast, East slow. So that is going to lead to conflicts and modernization. Great example of that would then be Russia not being able to modernize as fast. What are monopolies and what are bureaucracies? Okay, I didn't talk about that at all. So monopolies are going to be when you have kind of two examples of integration that occur. So, oh man, you can have a vertical integration or you can have horizontal integration. So what that means is that if you are, let's say, I'm going to give you a US example because maybe this is a little bit easier because you've taken US history before. If we're looking at Andrew Carnegie, captain of industry, turn of the 1900s in Europe or in the United States. Go away. Oh my gosh. Okay. He controlled, I think he did both, right? So he controlled like literally all of the various productions of creating steel. So he was like, I'm going to control the land. I'm going to control the railroads. I'm going to control the markets. I'm going to control everything. But then he also controlled, like he just like literally controlled every facet of the production of something. And if you are controlling every facet of a production of something, you have a monopoly, which means that you can charge whatever price you want because you have no competitors. So if you control literally every mean of production to produce a good, like you control, like you are the only one who has control over that, you can do whatever you want. In my economics classes in the past, we talked about whether or not like Amazon is a monopoly. Because if you're going to go like Target, I mean, we're not going to get into the weeds. But if you have like one company that essentially is your go-to that you buy everything from, does that count as like a modern day monopoly? Bureaucracy. So a bureaucracy just means people who work for the government. So you can think of like, if we're looking at, again, just the United States, we have a president, we have cabinet, we have people who work for him. All of those people who like work in various stages of the government, whether that's like your local congressman, your legislators, those are all part of the bureaucracy. So just people who work for the government. Differences between first and second wave of industrialization. First wave is like happening in England, hands to machines. Then as industrialization starts to spread throughout Western Europe, it takes on that second wave. And that's going to be just like everyone now is using steel. Everyone's now using factories. It doesn't have to be steam power. We're using electricity. John Wesley and Methodism is Romanticism. Yeah, that's a great. Maybe I always tie them together because Wesley and Methodism is a response to the Enlightenment. Again, like that focus on reason. Wesley says, actually, let's just like have this personal relationship with God. Let's like really focus on what it means to like have like this communal aspect with the Lord. So you can maybe think about that in regards to Romanticism and that it's like about emotions. Yeah, that's fine. What is your advice if we get an SAQ nor LEQ topic of? I don't know what that means, but I'm going to try to interpret that question. Just a reminder, when you get to your SAQs, so you have your multiple choice, then you're going to have your short answer questions. Your short answer questions, you have to answer 3 total. You will have to answer the first 2. The first one is going to have a secondary source as a stimulus. The second one's going to have a primary source as a stimulus. And you're going to get to the third and fourth. You're just going to choose one. They will probably deal with the same theme, just in a different time period. So what I really like, again, about the College Board is that they don't want you to just regurgitate things that you've known in class or that you've learned in class. They give you the opportunity to be as successful as you can be. So if you don't know one of the prompts, don't answer it. Same thing with the LEQs. You're going to have 3 options in 3 different time periods, and you can just choose the one that you know the best. What I've been telling my students lately is that it is sometimes the best to choose the easiest answer. One of the old LEQ prompts that we went over today in my class was like, what was the most significant effect of the Enlightenment from 1688 to 1815? The easiest answer to that question is the French Revolution. Like, you could write leaps and bounds about how the French Revolution was inspired by the Enlightenment. You don't always have to choose the most nuanced answer to sound the smartest, because you will sound just as smart if you answer the question obviously, because you have a ton of evidence to support it. If you need examples for evidence that you don't, like if you're coming to an LEQ and you don't know what's going on, don't answer that LEQ. I know that that's not helpful, but that is what I would say to do. And try to think about it, right? If you were thinking about things within time periods, which is why I'm doing this review regarding time periods, not just specific units, is that you can hopefully like make some educated guesses, because the readers aren't going to take points off of what you say. They just wouldn't give you credit if you say something wrong. I also want to remind you that your readers are teachers. Like, we want to see you be as successful as possible, and we are going to try to give you the points when we can. So please keep that in mind. You just need to like really try to show understanding. Bismarck was removed after unification, so we can just talk about that one. He was growing in power and influence, and the Kaiser didn't want him to have that. So the Kaiser was like, I'm going to not allow you to be prime minister anymore, essentially. Okay. Oh, I'm not going to say anything against what your teacher tells you for advice. I would just say that I would answer the one that you feel the most confident in. Like, I mean, you can just choose the easiest one that you know that you have the most evidence for. I'm not grading these tests this year. I'm not going to be in the country. Any other questions? Okay. Here's Lewis again. I'm back here on Wednesday. This is our final one. So Wednesday is going to be our last unit of study, which is 1914 to the present. We're going to talk about a ton about national and European identity. We're going to talk a ton about Cold War and its effects. So make sure that you show up for that, especially if your teacher hasn't gotten all the way through the content yet. That's going to be a really helpful review. Okay, bye. Have a great night. Thanks for coming. Oh, contextualization. Yeah, again, choose the easiest option. Most things prior to like 1800s, you can tie back to the Protestant Reformation or Enlightenment. So just talk about that. Contextualization, you are trying to situate whatever the event is in the broader context of history. So the way that you can think about that is like, I always tell my students, it's like what a previously on before a new episode of TV. Like, I watch Grey's Anatomy. Grey's Anatomy is like 22 seasons long. It's insane. Grey's Anatomy will always bring in these people from like previous, like literally season 5, which was, I don't know, in the 2010, it was so long ago. And I have no recollection of what that person is. But on like the previously on before a new episode, they'll be like, hey, here's this person. Here's like the one thing that you need to know about this person. So that when this shows up on the screen, you're going to know exactly what's going on. That is a great way to think about contextualization. Like, what do I need to know? What events led to what the event of the prompt is asking? What do I need to know for that to make sense? Okay, thanks everyone. Have a great rest of your night. See you on Wednesday. Bye-bye.